This weekend, the Bucks and the 76ers made head coaching hires. On today's episode of Locked On Suns, we'll talk about why everything is laying out for Kevin Young to be the next head coach of the Suns and why, yes, you should be excited about it. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 6 seasons, a writer at Suns.com, and the host of the Just Basketball Show, wherever you get your podcast. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen to start out your Tuesday, maybe the first day of your work week. Maybe you've already been grinding this week. Maybe you didn't get to relax. Either way, appreciate you joining me. Hopefully you find some time. Hopefully you're finding time in between the craziness to enjoy the NBA offseason, enjoy the playoffs and finals as they continue to go, and keeping it right here each and every morning to get your taste of Phoenix Suns basketball. Become an everydayer. Get locked onto your favorite team by hitting follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available everywhere, every day. You can also follow along at Locked On PHX Suns, where in addition to the YouTube comment section, you can tell me what you think of Kevin Young, who is seemingly on his way to being the next head coach of the Suns. Maybe by the time you hear this, we will have even more concrete information there, but I'm going to do the best I can with the information we have, starting with Adrian Griffin getting hired by Milwaukee, and now Nick Nurse getting hired by Philadelphia. The NBA coaching carousel is spinning at full speed and likely to take some additional, I don't want to say victims because they're getting jobs. Take new breath and new life from some people as things go on. Ime Udoka already got hired. Quinn Snyder already got hired. Is the Suns going to be next? We'll get into it. Today's show brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Let's talk about the Woj report about Nurse being hired. So if you were reading and watching and following, you saw that the Bucks hired Adrian Griffin. That was the Giannis guy, apparently. They had Giannis sit in on those meetings and are going with his candidate, the one that he liked. And in that, you saw reporting that Nick Nurse backed out of that search. Now, with all of the language and craziness and rumors and insiders, all that stuff, it can sometimes be hard to tell what's real and what's being leaked strategically and what's being done to make people look a certain way and this, that, and the other. I don't feel necessarily like Nurse respectfully took himself out of the running. I feel like he did not think he was going to get it. The reporting around it seemed to be that they were choosing between two candidates and that Nurse was not going to be one of them. I believe it was Charles Lee, the assistant there, and the guy they eventually hired, which is Adrian Griffin. The other part of it is that Griffin is Nurse's assistant in Toronto, and so obviously it doesn't look great to have your assistant get a job over you. And so to say I was not part of that, I was not in the running any longer, I think looks a little better. But the obvious ripple effect very shortly thereafter is, okay, well, now he's the coach of the Philadelphia 76ers, Nick Nurse. So maybe he knew that was coming. Regardless, we're now left with the situation where Nurse was one of the Suns finalists. He is out of the running, and the Bucks' job is no longer open, leaving a lot less other candidacies and openings and things to pursue for some of the people who may be interested in the Suns' job, right? It's basically that the Suns are now the best opportunity on the market, and their finalist pool has dwindled. I don't believe Doc Rivers was ever a legitimate candidate, if I'm being completely honest. I don't even really believe that Frank Vogel was all that legitimate of a candidate. There just has not been enough noise around those guys, and there has not been a real argument made that I understand why you would fire Monty Williams with a lot of money and a lot of time left on his contract only to hire guys who have had similar struggles in recent years. Meaning, Ty Lue thing did not work out. Seems like he wants a new contract to stay with the Clippers or an extension or some sort of raise or something. He did not ever really become available. All these teams have now moved on. I don't think there's any reason to believe Ty Lue is going to miraculously crop up in anybody's search any longer. So it's Kevin Young and it's Jordi Fernandez. We have not heard much on the Fernandez side of things. I believe Gambo had it that he did come to Phoenix for an interview, but that's about the extent of it. You, like me, are probably already one step ahead of where I am here 5 minutes into this show, knowing full well that Kevin Young, things are stacking up for Kevin Young to go ahead and become the head coach of the Suns. Is there any way that doesn't happen? Let me do that real quick, because I'm going to put this show up as soon as I can here on Monday afternoon, evening, really, and to get ahead of the news. And some of you guys might hear or watch this prior to any additional information coming out. Is there any way it's not Kevin Young? I believe it could be another coach. I would say Vogel more likely than Rivers. I would say Fernandez maybe more likely than either one of them. But this is exactly the spot that the Suns found themselves in the minute that they decided to go ahead and fire Monty Williams. I mean, I've seen everything from a top 5 coach to a top 10 coach to a top 15 coach thrown around online. I don't know how you all feel. I don't really feel like I necessarily know enough to really differentiate between the 12th and the 11th coach, for instance, feels a little bit like semantics, but he was a very good coach. A lot of teams would like to have Monty Williams. There are already rumors that the Detroit Pistons made him a lucrative offer. There was some rumblings that the Bucks might have had some interest, and then it doesn't seem like Monty wanted to pursue any of that. But that's evidence enough that he is a commodity in this league. He is somebody that has connections and has a history and is supported in this community and among fans. Yes, I know, maybe the diehards among us felt differently about Monty, but I think largely based on the average fans that I heard and the everyday fans who just kind of keep up with this stuff here and there was a lot of surprise about moving away from him because of how good he was, because of what he did for this organization. And so I say all of that, I remind you of all of that to say, this was always where the Suns were headed. If you were going to get a retread, you had to make him a better coach than Monty. You had to find one of the very few coaches in this league who are definitively better than Monty Williams. I think Nick Nurse, you could make a case. And if there was some respect among, if Durant and Booker liked the idea of Nick Nurse, or if we felt like he would have a better relationship with, let's say, ownership or whatever, if they had a nice path, if Nurse had a pathway to bringing on really good assistants, or there might have been arguments to be made there. I don't think Rivers or Vogel were going to be a step forward or even a step sideways. I think both of those coaches would have been a step back. And then you get to somebody like Kevin Young. And so I mean, it's no secret. If you've been listening to this show, you know that I always was a supporter of Kevin Young. And even beyond that, I was a supporter of finding a first-timer, not shying away from new ideas, a new direction, and somebody who might be dipping their toes into this whole thing for the first time. I stand by that. I think that if you wanted to have a retread coach who was trying to get over the hump, you could have kept Monty Williams. If you were not going to get Ty Lue, if Nick Nurse didn't feel like a concrete enough step forward, well, then I think somebody who brings in a fresh perspective is going to be for the best. So I fully support Kevin Young, and I fully expect him to become the next head coach of the Suns. We'll have more time to dive deeply into what it is that he will do. But where I want to go next is to remind all of you, because I think there's been some understandable and legitimate concern that, well, what is this move? I talked about backward steps and sideways steps with some of these other retreads, but well, are we really getting something different here in Phoenix if it's the assistant of the guy who just got fired? I'll answer that question next. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by the Game Time app. And Game Time is the best place to buy tickets, the official ticketing partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. And look, it is my favorite place to buy tickets because they have a bunch of protections for you. So a lowest price guarantee, an event cancellation protection, job loss protection. But my favorite part are the flash deals and the images of your seat views. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. You get images of your seat in the app before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds. 2 taps and you're set. Tickets are sent then directly to your phone, so you never have to sit there digging through your email when you are trying to find what you need. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, let's talk about the differences between Monty and Kevin Young. But I'm actually not going to start with Young or Williams. I'm going to start with another former Suns assistant coach who has gone on to greener pastures and gone on to be somebody who has proven themselves to be very different than Monty, and that is Willie Green. So Willie Green started his coaching history with the Golden State Warriors. He was like a sort of intern, player development, not formally an assistant coach with the Warriors when he first started. And then he slowly made his way up further and further. And in Monty's second season, he brought Willie Green over to become an assistant coach for him, then became the lead assistant, and then obviously was snagged away by the Pelicans during that playoff run in 2021 that ultimately led the Suns to the finals. In his first year, mind you, as an assistant here in Phoenix. So I bring that up to point out that 2 parts of Willie Green's journey are similar, or let me say one part is similar, and I think the outcome will also be similar to make it that second part. The first part is that they came from places outside of Monty Williams' environment, right? This is not a situation where Monty developed these guys as assistants and they are sort of the Monty Williams coaching tree, so to speak, right? Willie Green came up through the Warriors system, which has had a really nice track record now between Mike Brown as a retread guy, learning some new things, Kenny Atkinson doing the same thing. Jaron Collins is a candidate in Detroit who also came up through the Warriors system and then actually has been under Green with the Pelicans. And then similarly with Kevin Young, he came up through, it's been a winding road, but a lot of D-League stuff. And then Brett Brown hired him in Philadelphia. That's when he and Monty crossed paths, but that wasn't a situation of Monty being the one to sort of like develop and discover Kevin Young. He just spotted a smart coach and brought him over. And so I think the same thing could happen with a Kevin Young in a head coaching role. Willie Green, I think, demonstrated very clearly to all of us watching the playoffs last year that he is a more aggressive schemer, a more aggressive adjuster, and even things like timeouts and different things in lineups and things like that in game. He's a little bit more aggressive and creative with those things. Think about how Jackson Hayes was used in that playoff series as a power forward at times and as, a transition, and they were able to make playable minutes even with their injuries, even with Zion being unavailable. They were missing a lot of shots. CJ McCollum wasn't that efficient in that series, and yet they took the Suns to 6 games and came very close to, 7 games or potentially beating them. It was not an easy series. I believe that Kevin Young can do the same thing. And Doug Haller wrote a piece at The Athletic where he said, this line caught my attention about the similarities between Brett Brown and Kevin Young. Billy Lang and Kevin Young, but Brown as well. The reason that there was so much camaraderie and commonality on that 76ers staff, he said, they were a lot alike, offensively minded, analytically driven, and always thinking outside the box. And I think that'll be music to Suns fans' ears. Doug Haller also wrote about the time that Young spent in the D-League, that he did his best to always give players offensive freedom within the system. And then a quote from, also Billy Lang, is from an offensive standpoint, Young is going to be creative to whatever that person's unique skill sets are. His philosophy will be built around their skill sets, not the other way around. And at the same time, he'll make sure that that what he has is appropriate for the rest of the team. And so what does that tell us? One, I think that a lot of that description is not similar to how you would think about Monty Williams, right? And people have pointed out already about, as this search has gone on, offensive rebounding and the Suns flipping from bottom 10 to top 10 this season was largely about Kevin Young. And Monty had referenced the fact that the decision to play TJ Warren, he credited to Kevin Young. And so a lot of these decisions that have gone very well for the Suns have been credited to this guy, in addition to all these people in this Athletic article that are fawning over his aggressiveness, his determination, his creativity, and the way that he's able to connect with players and empower players. I think all of that is the type of thing that Suns fans want to hear, and not a lot of it really honestly sounds like Monty. I think Monty was somebody who had the principles of the Spurs offense, their ball movement offense. I think that he obviously used his time away from the head coaching spot to really diversify how he constructed that offense to be much more built around pick and roll and having options out of the pick and roll. He was able to work with somebody like Chris Paul. He has players that he's gotten through to very well, has players who he has had great relationships with, but obviously had some that were not so great. And I think the defensive philosophy especially was something that maybe is a regular season high floor defensive philosophy, but the refusal to switch DeAndre Ayton, the refusal to hedge or blitz in the pick and roll outside of a few select moments that weren't consistently put out there, and then lineups and different things were pretty inflexible and not all that. They were creative to be on the front end, but not creative to be reimagined continuously as you go. A lot of what we saw the Suns do was a variation of what Monty might have been doing with Ricky Rubio in his first season. And maybe that's a little too harsh. Obviously, there was an evolution, but I don't think it was dramatic, and I don't think we felt like there was a lot of change night to night. Kevin Young has to prove that. I'm not sitting here telling you that I went back and watched, the Utah Flash games of 2011 D-League stuff to tell you that I know for sure that that guy is going to be a big upgrade or a big change. But from the evidence we have, from the evidence that, Matt Ishbia, James Jones, etc. have to consider him as a candidate in the first place, I'm sure a lot of it came from that, not to mention the connection to Devin Booker and the support that he seems to have from Booker, from Durant, which Monty clearly did not have. Otherwise, I think Monty would still have this job. By the end, I'm saying. I don't think that Monty was never able to get through to these guys, but I think that there was a little bit of tiredness with it. So if people are feeling like this is a sideways move or some sort of not something that's not going to make a difference, something that in effect is going to have the same outcome, the same result, the same process, the same approach, just because Kevin Young came from the staff of the guy who just got fired, I don't think that that's how this stuff works. And history tells us the same thing. So I want to talk about why a first-timer is not always a bad thing. And I think the rest of the NBA seems to agree with me. We'll get into it next. First, another quick break. Okay, so the Milwaukee Bucks, I think, are the other franchise in the league heading into this head coaching search that had the most on the line. Maybe you would say Philadelphia, but I think that there is a potential case to be made that they don't know what's sitting in front of them. There's a chance that this year is a little bit of a reset year if they aren't able to retain Harden. So I see Milwaukee with what's looming with Giannis, the fact that they might have so much change happening with Brook Lopez, with Chris Middleton, with however they want to approach all of this in Milwaukee, that hire was, next to Phoenix, the most high-pressure hire that there was. And what they did is they went out and got an assistant. They defaulted to what their star player wanted. They got an assistant who's well-respected, who had a familiarity with, apparently, I don't know if they had a pre-existing relationship or just came to be connected and have chemistry during the interview process, but Griffin had that and brought some innovation and well-respected stuff to the table, and they went ahead and hired him. I've brought this stuff up before, but I will say it again. Darvin Ham is a perfect example of this. You want to talk about pressure in the league. How about the fact that, LeBron James and Anthony Davis want to win another championship? LeBron James is, in his late 30s and still wants a chance to get a crack at a title, wants to make it to the finals. And you hire a guy who had never been a head coach before in Darvin Ham. And there was a lot that he was able to do between, getting Anthony Davis to play the 5 full time, getting Russell Westbrook to be mostly okay with a bench role, and again, aggressive adjustments throughout the playoffs, especially as it relates to where Anthony Davis was stationed defensively and things of that nature, who had the ball in their hands, lineup stuff. He was constantly tinkering. And I'm not saying tinkering for the sake of tinkering is just a good thing, but I think you would make the case that Darvin Ham's adjustments and coaching and creativity was one of the biggest advantages that the Lakers had in their playoff series. I mean, Steve Kerr's a great coach, but whether it's the Grizzlies or being able to at least answer what it was that Kerr was doing, I think you would say that Darvin Ham did a really great job there. Tyronn Lue with the Cleveland Cavaliers after David Black gets fired. What does Tyronn Lue do? Well, I think he commits to more switching on defense, more empowerment of the star players on his team from an offensive standpoint, more aggressive adjustments in game and when it comes to lineups and everything else, and he wins a championship with Cleveland. Now, again, coaching is not the reason these things are happening, but I think when you can point to specific adjustments and differences that those coaches make, it's a pretty good case that they are the right call. I think I already talked about Willie Green. I would put Jacque Vaughn on that list personally as somebody who came in with the Brooklyn Nets, and they, both times that he took over for Kenny Atkinson on the front end and then for Steve Nash, they seemed to really click, and you could feel the impact of his changes on that team. So what I'm saying is there a track record. There is a track record, even among teams with a lot of pressure, even among teams that had to figure out a lot of things. There is a track record of first-timers, assistant coaches coming in and being able to get the job done. Now, obviously, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Kevin Young was the absolute best hire that they could have made, or that there's no, if for some reason it was to pivot to somebody else in the random last hours of this thing, that there's no way they could do better. Of course, they could do better, but you look around the league at the good cases of either teams that hired a retread or potentially kept their coach, because that's another option the Suns had. Michael Malone, year 8, I believe, on his way to potentially his first NBA final. It is his first NBA finals. It may be a championship for them this season. I think you would point to, Rick Carlisle in Dallas and some of these other cases where it takes a while and then it clicks and then you go. Obviously, I think if the Suns had had a chance to hire a Quinn Snyder or an Ime Udoka, they probably would have looked hard at doing that. And then retreads, right? Those two that I just said were retreads, but even prior to this offseason, Mike Brown is a good example of a retread who has had a really successful second tenure. Maybe you say Jason Kidd. I don't know how you feel, but there are countless examples of guys who get rehired after being fired elsewhere and have success. Yet, if the problem was a lack of aggressiveness, a lack of creativity, potentially a stale voice, an inability to mend fences with different players and key figures in this organization, then I think it's hard to put out the message that we're going to hire somebody who has had those same problems elsewhere. At the end of the day, as much as you may like a Nick Nurse or a Frank Vogel, or I've even heard Terry Stotts for whatever reason. I don't know why some of these names are coming up. I don't personally like the sound of a lot of those, but if you did, what I would say to ask yourself is, Why were those people fired in the first place? In the case of somebody like Ty Lue, who is also a retread, his second shot in Los Angeles, he seemed to, it was probably a fairly mutual decision when LeBron James left, right? Certain other candidates who you might like, although I think a lot of the best coaches in the league right now are people who got their job and have not relinquished it. Eric Spoelstra, Steve Kerr, etc. So there aren't a lot of Ty Lues even. But for the most part, the people who are available or who could be available, they are that way. They are on the market because they failed in some way in their last job. And so I just don't get the idea to be so excited for somebody whose last boss decided they were not cutting it over somebody who has proven themselves capable and ready for this, and at the very least has a higher ceiling. The Suns don't need a high floor. They had a high floor. They moved on from a high floor. I just don't get the people who are not on board with this. But we don't know if it will happen 100%. I think by the next time we talk, we very well might. I look forward to learning more about Kevin Young, the introductory press conference, the statements that are put out, the reporting around it, all the different things that will come once the job is officially his, if indeed it goes that way. And we can learn together what makes this guy tick. And I will continue to inform myself and learn and bring people on this show who can help us understand. Because again, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know everything about the Utah Flash or the assistant coaching staff for the 2017 Philadelphia 76ers. Like none of that. I'm not going to sit here and lie. But I'm excited. I'm intrigued. I think it's the right way to go, and I think it's a trend in the NBA that is not unique to the Suns, which makes me feel like they are actually part of a movement in a direction that is promising rather than trying to be an outlier. So even that is a tick in the success column, in my opinion. But that'll wrap us up for today. More to come, obviously, as this thing hits its final stages. I will talk to you all tomorrow. In the meantime, hit follow or subscribe. Get this show in your feed when it comes out. And listen to Locked On Sports today as well. Get the lowdown on everything across the whole sports landscape. That show's available on all podcast platforms just like this one. And I'll catch you guys tomorrow.